Maybe, in the end, living with authenticity is the most subversive and most human act we have left. And what if everything you call you is actually just an unconscious social agreement? Let's embark together on a journey where comfort gives way to awareness, where wounds are maps, and where freedom has no script. From our first steps, we are shaped more by external expectations than by internal discoveries. Childhood, which should be a territory of authenticity, is quickly overtaken by silent rules about what is normal, beautiful, intelligent, acceptable. Every spontaneous gesture is gradually filtered by eyes that expect obedience, not truth. It's as if the authentic self were placed in quarantine, until further notice. And that notice almost always comes too late. As we grow, we learn to perform. We smile so as not to displease, hide thoughts so we don't seem strange, silence desires to maintain belonging. It's not that we become fake, we become efficient at social survival. The true self gets smothered under layers of adaptation until we confuse politeness with repression, civility with self-erasure. The construction of the acceptable self is not neutral. It comes with an invisible but deep cost. Unlearning, in this context, is almost a sacred act of rebellion. It's about questioning everything taught as the truth about you. It's about making room for the discomfort of not knowing, of not fitting in, of not following. Because before we know who we are, we need to let go of who we think we should be. It's not about rejecting everything but about investigating what in me is truly mine, and what is just social programming disguised as identity. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Man is condemned to be free." That freedom begins when we realize our identity is not a destiny, but a construction. And every construction starts with demolition. Who would you be if you had been born into another family, another culture, another era? Exactly. The answer to that question is the first step to freeing yourself from the domesticated version of yourself. Nietzsche didn't write to comfort. He wrote to tear down veils. When he challenges us with the idea of becoming who you are, what he's really saying between the lines is that this path is not romantic, it's brutal. Because no one transforms without first confronting their own falsehood. The false self we build over the years to be accepted isn't just a lie. It's armor. And armor doesn't come off without pain. That pain, as devastating as it may seem, is the beginning of something grand. It's the sign that the process has begun. Deconstructing oneself hurts because it requires mourning versions of ourselves that no longer make sense but still offer some stability. It's like leaving a cell where, despite the confinement, there was food, shelter, and predictability. Freedom is frightening precisely because it offers no guarantees, only responsibility. Curiously, many people spend their entire lives inside this comfortable prison, confusing adaptation with identity. They follow routines, fulfill roles, wear masks, all in the name of a peace that is actually stagnation. The existential crisis is not a sign of failure, but of clarity. It's life saying, "You are not this thing you're living." But not everyone listens. Because listening takes courage. And courage is scarce when fear feels protective. Nietzsche didn't promise salvation. He promised clarity. And clarity hurts. But only in the destruction of the mask can something authentic emerge. You don't need a new version of yourself. Maybe you need the version that was suffocated. And that begins with a simple but uncomfortable question. How many parts of me were built just to please? From an early age, we learn a silent lesson. Being loved comes at a price. And that price, almost always, is being less of yourself. We give up sincere parts to fit into spaces that weren't made to house our truth. We suppress opinions, dull desires, adjust the tone of our voice, the way we walk, even the rhythm of our thoughts. And we call that socialization. But at some point, that adaptation stops being a choice and becomes a condition. Humans have a visceral need to belong. Not out of weakness, but for survival. In early life, belonging is a matter of life and death. But the problem is that this ancestral logic infiltrates adult relationships. We start to believe we'll only be accepted if we are pleasant, neutral, predictable. And, without realizing it, we begin to disappear into increasingly domesticated versions of ourselves. The truth is that many loves, friendships, and bonds are maintained based on who we pretend to be. And that comes at a high cost. A cost that doesn't show on the surface but corrodes from within. It's the silent exhaustion, the feeling of being surrounded and yet profoundly alone. Because there is no real intimacy where there is no authenticity. The invisible cost of approval is the waste of our own essence, a life spent trying to fit into molds that were never ours. Being accepted for what we're not is a sophisticated form of rejection. It's being loved, but not wholly. It's receiving affection, yes, but for a version of ourselves that is, at best, a half-truth. Embracing the true self is not finding peace. It's declaring war. Not against others, but against everything that was imposed as unquestionable within. Discovering who you really are brings deep anguish because it dismantles certainties, labels, and comfort zones. The authentic self is not a refuge. It's a battlefield where old habits, beliefs, and fears fiercely resist transformation. This anguish, although painful, is not pathological. It's a sign of life. It's the echo of a being who refuses to remain anesthetized. When we commit to reinventing ourselves, we're not just changing behaviors, we're challenging entire systems of meaning. And every choice for authenticity comes with a price, the loss of easy certainties. But it also delivers a rare prize, the dignity of being whole even if misunderstood. Freedom, when real, comes with an almost unbearable responsibility. There's no one left to blame. No more convenient excuses. You become the author of your own narrative, the architect of your own pain and glory. And that, though liberating, is frightening. Because most people prefer the safety of the predictable to the vertigo of being free. After all, being free also means being vulnerable to error, failure, and loneliness. As Kierkegaard said, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. It's the feeling of looking into the abyss of possibilities and knowing that none of them come with a manual. The true self is that point where there are no more external guarantees, only presence, awareness, and choice. It's in this uncertain terrain that the courage to be, despite everything, is born. Finding oneself is not stumbling upon a hidden essence within, but declaring with radicality, "This is what I choose to be." It's not revelation, it's creation. And every act of creation involves risk. The risk of not being understood, of being rejected, of going against the current. True singularity is uncomfortable, because it breaks conventions, destabilizes expectations, and challenges the comfort of others. But still, it's the only way to live with truth. Nietzsche called this inner force the will to power, not in the sense of dominating others, but of affirming one's own existence without asking permission. It's the creative energy that says yes to life, even when everything around shouts no. The will to power is that impulse that refuses resignation and insists on building a life with authorship. It's the vital rebellion against the normalization of being. But it takes courage to choose yourself when the world points fingers. The pressure to belong is fierce, and social judgment harshly punishes difference. Asserting your uniqueness is almost an act of cultural heresy. Because most people prefer comfortable imitation over risky authenticity. And living as an exception requires strength, resilience, and often, a certain dose of solitude. Nietzsche didn't idealize this process. He knew that choosing yourself also means giving up easy love, predictable paths, and guarantees. That's why his philosophy is not for the faint of heart. Truly becoming who you are means accepting that every step in that direction might be a step outside the system. But it's also, paradoxically, a return to the truest core of yourself. The idea that there's a true self waiting to be discovered, like buried treasure, is comforting, but illusory. The truth is that we are not found, we are made. We are sculptures in process, clay still wet in the hands of time and awareness. The authentic self is not a natural given. It's a deliberate, patient, and often painful construction. Being yourself is a work constantly being rewritten. This means that authenticity is not a state, it's a movement. A daily commitment to inner truth even when it changes. Even when it challenges what you believed to be true yesterday. Because the true self is not fixed but faithful. Faithful to the impulse to live with integrity, even if that requires continuous deconstruction. As Heraclitus said, no man ever steps in the same river twice, and no self is the same from one day to the next. This construction demands courage because it will often be lonely. The world celebrates the authentic but only after it succeeds. Until then, it is uncomfortable, strange, inappropriate. It's easier to follow the script than to improvise with sincerity. But improvisation is the only true path, because real life has no rehearsal, only choice, error, and reinvention. Every authentic gesture is a small act of resistance. Being yourself, then, is not a destination. It's a practice. A daily exercise in listening to yourself, correcting yourself, defending yourself, and expressing yourself. And above all, it's a continuous act of courage in the face of pressure to be anything but you. Authenticity in this sense is not about essence, it's about intention. It's about living as if each choice were a brushstroke in the masterpiece you're creating, your own existence. There is a moment in the process of authenticity when everything seems to fall apart. Not because something went wrong, but because something finally started to go right. When you remove the mask, you reveal a face that many have never seen and some won't like. What you achieved by being who you were not may not survive your truth. Relationships, jobs, status. All of that can fall away when you decide to stop performing. And that collapse is painful. Because even if superficial, the affection received was still affection. Even if illusory, belonging still offered shelter. Letting go of those guarantees may seem like madness. But paradoxically, it is pure sanity. Because living to maintain fragile bonds is a slow way to die inside. Authenticity is expensive, but it gives something the false self can never sustain: peace of mind. The fall of those masks reveals not only who you are, but also who is truly with you. What remains after the rupture is a silence that can be deafening and necessary. The solitude that emerges is not punishment, but transition. It's the vacuum between the old persona and the self under construction. It's a time of fertile emptiness, where bonds reorganize based on new truths, not old adaptations. Nietzsche said that the superior man is one who liberates himself from the conventions of his time. But that liberation comes with losses. And accepting them is a sign of spiritual maturity. Because you begin to understand that if something breaks when you show your essence, maybe it was never real. The pain of that loss is the price of authenticity, and also the gateway to true connection. The feeling of not fitting in is one of the most universal and most misunderstood pains. From an early age, we're taught to see this inadequacy as personal failure. But maybe it's exactly the opposite. The sign that something inside you refuses to accept the unacceptable. The identity crisis, so feared, is often the first symptom of a deep awakening. When everything around loses meaning, what emerges is the call to create new meaning from within. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the movement of becoming whole, integrating what was repressed, denied, or forgotten. It is not a linear or painless path. It requires diving into dark zones, facing old ghosts, confronting open wounds. But it is in that confrontation that a new internal structure is born. A self, less influenced by the need to please and more guided by the truth of existence. The pain of not belonging in this context becomes psychic fertility. It's the empty space where a new center of identity can begin to form. A center that no longer depends on external validation, but on internal coherence. This transition is like crossing a desert. Lonely, uncertain, but absolutely necessary. Because only those who have lost all masks can find a true face. Maybe deep down you were never lost. You were just being led out of an old version of yourself. And that movement, as uncomfortable as it may be, is an act of quiet courage. It is the refusal to live a life inherited, and the birth of a life chosen. Individuation doesn't promise easy answers, but it offers something even more valuable: an authentic path, even if winding, toward the center of your own soul. The feeling of being lost is not a mistake, it's an invitation. A deep call for reconstruction. When everything seems confusing, directionless, meaningless, maybe that's exactly when life starts to speak louder. The anguish, so feared, may be the compass that points inward. It's not about seeking a path outside yourself, but listening to what within you is trying to be born. And birth, as we know, is rarely gentle. Nietzsche proposes a brutal and liberating idea: the eternal return. Living as if every choice were destined to be repeated eternally. A radical provocation that forces us to ask, would you bear to live this same life, this same day, over and over, forever? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to rebuild. Because living truthfully is living in a way that's worth repeating. This reconstruction doesn't require haste. It requires presence. It doesn't require having everything figured out, it requires a willingness to ask better questions. Instead of what should I be, maybe ask, what makes sense for me now? Reconstruction is a slow, organic process that respects the being's own timing. And every small step toward coherence is, in itself, a silent victory against the chaos of the world. You are not lost. You are in transition. And transitions are sacred spaces, where the old has not yet left, and the new has not yet arrived, but where everything is in turmoil. This state of suspension is fertile. It's a symbolic womb where the new self begins to take shape, and recognizing that is already, in itself, an act of reconstruction. Because accepting the pain of the crossing is also accepting the potential of who you are becoming. There comes a moment when you understand, there is no manual, no destiny, no pre-written script. Living your true self means accepting that everything is being written in real time, that every choice is a brushstroke in the painting of your own existence. The self is not an essence to be discovered, but a constant act of creation. We are not something we are something we make. And making yourself requires courage, presence, and commitment to the moment. This radical freedom, though frightening, is also a rare gift. It takes us out of the role of spectators of life and returns us to the place of authors. But being an author means accepting the risk of improvisation, of doubt, of failure. Because creating yourself implies mistakes and starting over. It means living in a handcrafted, unique way with no guarantees. A freedom that is not comfort but radical responsibility for your own existence. Nietzsche said that, man is something that must be overcome, and maybe this overcoming begins when we stop searching for essence and start acting with wholeness. The true self is not waiting to be found in a hidden place, but asking to be lived in the now. It is in total presence with life that the meaningful choices arise. And only those who allow themselves to be fully present can build a future with authenticity. In the end, living your true self is letting go of the safety of formulas. It is choosing each day a path that has not yet been walked. And in doing so, transforming your life into an existential masterpiece, not because it is perfect but because it is profoundly yours. Without inherited drafts, without necessary masks. Just living creation, conscious and imperfect. A life that pulses because it is real. In the end, maybe the question was never, who am I? But rather, who am I willing to be even if no one approves? If this video provoked you, touched you, or helped you see yourself more clearly, leave a comment below. And if you want to continue on this journey of awareness, there's another piece of content showing up on your screen right now that might be exactly what you need to see. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep going with us.